I'm going to back and do this. I'm going to come back and do that.
Yep.
And I'm just going to say, good afternoon, David.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm good. Glad to be here.
Oh, I'm
Excited.
super happy to have you.
I should have run downstairs and gotten my my frame data nerd T-shirt.
Oh,
If
you have
you
one?
say that, I do. It was a giveaway at God. I don't remember Velocity. Maybe I don't. It was some conference years ago. Uh, that I grabbed one at.
Well, we'll know next time. I feel we'll probably have a part two at some point. You know, like there's a lot of stuff to discuss. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Aaron. I see you in the chat. And the last thing actually I'm going to mention before I forget is that because I always forget to mention this, folks, during the duration of the stream, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, whatever platform you're on, whether it be YouTube or LinkedIn, I think you should be able to pop a question in the chat and it'll populate here and I'll see it. So, by all means, if you have questions during our presentation, this episode, you're free to pop it in and I'll try to squeeze you in as best I can. Now, this is a great story, because I think part of the idea of sort of having fun episodes and content and whatnot is sort of like scanning, looking around, reading things, spotting things. And I'd seen Cloudflare tweet out something along the lines of like some data, and it just didn't read right. I was like, I don't know. I haven't had my coffee this morning. I'm not sure what's going on here. And I think David and I were both in this Slack, and I posted it. I'm like, hey, can anyone read this? Because I don't think I'm reading this right. And apparently there was a typo, which was totally fine. But
My bad.
that pardon me?
So my bad.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. But that led to me sort of like digging into this document that they were talking about. And I immediately knew that this is something that I wanted to feature on the stream. So that brings us, pardon me, to this very moment. So today we are going to talk about the year in review I'm probably saying it wrong. The Cloudflare Radar Year in Review. Is that correct?
Yep. For 2025. Yep.
Awesome, awesome. I'm definitely looking forward to that because how would you define or how would you describe that document, that year in review?
So I'll take sort of a step back from that. So Radar is something that we launched in 2020 and have evolved over the past 5+ years. And it's our, I guess, portal, for our perspective on the internet. So based on the data exhaust from Cloudflare services for the most part, we show you what's happening on the internet, whether that's traffic wise, security wise, connectivity wise, whatever. And then the year review is something we publish each December generally. And what we try to do is wrap up across various metrics, provide a year-long perspective, or I guess more accurately, an 11-month perspective um, on those given metrics. So in Radar, you can go in and you can say, I want to look at traffic trends for the last 24 hours, the last week, the last month, whatever. And then the longer on Radar, the longer the period you select, the more highly aggregated it is. So the trends there are, I would say, directionally correct, but in many cases you miss some of the nuances. So on your review, we try to show like year-long trends at a daily level, so you can see more of the ups and downs and more of the potential shifts that happen in more detail.
Now, um, again, this is the kind of information that I love because I don't think people realize, what happens on the internet. There are a lot of little details that can explain other, events or other
Right.
items along the way. But we'll get into the meat of that story in a few. What I'd love to do right now is just kind of like have you introduce yourself to the audience because I don't think they really know who you are.
Sure. Yep. I'm David Belson. I am the head of data insight at Cloudflare, and I have product management responsibility for Cloudflare Radar. I joined the company in January of 2022. Been in the industry for, let's see, this will be 31 years. So I'm old, well, comparatively. Started out at BBN Planet. So they were the internet piece, effectively, the internet subsidiary of BBN, which had built out the original ARPANET. So joined them in '95 when web hosting was first starting to be a thing. Um, and was there a couple of days, went on my first sales call like 2 or 3 days in. I remember going home and saying to my roommate, I'm like, John, they're paying me to talk about the web. This is like the coolest job ever. And so I've just sort of stayed in the industry since then. Uh,
Amazing.
yeah, it was great. I'm still getting paid to talk about the web. So, I guess it's all worked out. Um,
Well, he has. Please go ahead.
moved from there to Akamai. Spent 18 years at Akamai. And then moved from there through Oracle, the Internet Society, Fastly, and now I've been at Cloudflare for the last 4 years.
Wow. Amazing. You know, Akamai, Fastly, uh, Cloudflare, you have this sort of penchant for the classic CDNs.
Yeah. I missed a couple, but they're also out of business at this point. So I
Yeah.
guess it's all worked out.
I love that you mentioned the ARPANET. It's as we all know, Al Gore invented the internet, so you're around for that moment, I gather.
It was a little bit. When did he make that statement? I forget. I think it was a little bit. It was Clinton, so it was probably a little bit before I joined BBN. But yeah, it's interesting to see, just how much things have changed from uh from 1995 through today. And I actually did. I joined BBN while I was my first year of grad school. So my bachelor's thesis was actually on computer mediated communication. So when I go back and look at it and say, here's all these things that you could use the internet for, and now it's like you look back at it now, 30 whatever years later, and it's like, okay, yeah, we're definitely doing that, and yeah, we're doing that, and that was a terrible idea. And there's a whole section in there about telecommuting, which now we're both working from home, so I guess that worked out. So I've been kind of on this path for quite a while.
Oh, that's amazing. I'd be interested in reading that just because again, you had your own little crystal ball and you're trying to kind of like figure out like what this internet thing was going to be all about. And, you're trying to project these ideas that, I'm sure some of them, like you said, were probably bad ideas, but other kind of came to fruition.
It was the bad ideas were the ones I think that ultimately turned into social media platforms.
Oh boy, that could be an episode on its own.
Yeah.
Um, but the other question I always have, and we mentioned this previously in our call, is if you had to go back and think of the one moment where you thought, uh, working in and around web performance um, became a bit more of a reality. When was that?
I'll probably say there were. I'm gonna cheat a little bit and say there were probably 2 points in time. Or there's probably more actually, but I guess two maybe that stood out. One would be I think when I joined Akamai because the foundation of the company was about web performance, and so working with customers to measure the performance of their websites and their web pages, sort of before Akamai, after Akamai. So we set up these tests in Keynote and Gomez, if you remember them, and try to show and then work with them to try to optimize and tune whatever they've got their configurations to to gain the best possible performance. Certainly not at the level of detail, at least at that time, that I know a lot of the other folks in the industry and a lot of your other guests deal with. And hearing some of them talk, it's amazing to see just how complex and how detailed all of that's gotten. So I think one is joining Akamai and seeing just the absolute focus on web performance there. The other, which is I think driven my career over the last now almost 18 years, was when I was working at Akamai, working in marketing, and our CMO basically called me into his office. And he said, "Hey," he shows me this presentation he'd been working on. And he said, "Hey, I've been thinking, we've got all these services, we've got all this data. We should do something with it. We should give back to give back to the internet, and use it for thought leadership and whatever. Go figure it out." So I went off and I thought about it. And I talked to some folks, and that ultimately wound up becoming the State of the Internet program that we had at Akamai. So that got me, I think, that made me realize just how just how much interesting value and basically there's gold in them there are hills, as they say. That there's just so much interesting stuff and so much interesting value locked up in the big data that these companies have. Companies like Akamai and Cloudflare.
Absolutely. And folks, he's talking about these publications called State of the Internet. And in our sort of like pre-call, kind of like kicking it, talking about the stream, uh, I think I brought them up and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm responsible for that." And that's when I just dropped out of my chair because I remember reading those cover to cover, and in fact, I was able to pull some up because I was like, "Man, they have to be somewhere." And, I had some on, I guess my iCloud, whatever, but I pulled them up on my iPad and had like four editions. And I was so delighted. I need to go back through them, but the fact that I found them and when you mentioned to me that, you're responsible for those, I was like, I remember every goddamn line.
So we're writing a lot of them.
Oh man, I read those. I had so much fun. They were so great. So thank you for that. It's funny how things come kind of full circle. Let's fast forward that to 2025. Or, you had mentioned just moments ago when you were at, so the radar. I mean, what is radar ultimately? Because is it like an application? Is it like a service? Because I've been to the dashboard.
I mean, that's what it is basically. It's that website.
Yeah.
It's radar.cloudflare.com. You can go there, and there's a whole set of different metrics that you can look at. You can filter in various ways, country level, region level, network level, kind of system, and then you can um, also drill down in certain ways. We have a data explorer, we call it. So you can go and you drill down into some more, you can apply more filters than we have on just the regular radar page. But basically, it's our way of again, giving back to the internet community, giving back to researchers, giving back to folks that focus on performance, what have you. And security folks, obviously, and saying, here's what we see. Here's our perspective on what's happening on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and again, yeah, I s Cloudflare, I have to apologize. I think you have a lot of interesting kind of like services and things out there that I've just not spent enough time there, and I'm just kinda like, "Oh my god, Cloudflare has this? Cloudflare has."
Yeah, I mean, and we're launching this new stuff constantly. Some of it we do, I'd say, a really good job of announcing, and some of the cool stuff is sort of like it just sort of sneaks out in a release note, and
Yeah.
and then other people are like, "Wait, what? You can do that now?"
Yeah, absolutely. I was just digging around just, through, some of the links on the year in review doc and it took me to places I didn't know existed. I was like, where am I? Like, what is that? Oh my God. So now the next 45 minutes have been spent like, toying with this dashboard.
Going down rabbit
And
holes, and yeah,
right, I was like, okay, I got to get back to this later. So now then the year in review started to get published. Now, that was being published before you joined Cloudflare, is that correct?
yeah. So I joined in January 2022. Radar launched during birthday week, so it's the end of September, 2020, and the first year review was sorry, first year review was published. I think probably January 2021, covering 2020. And my recollection is that it was in large part looking at traffic shifts and attack traffic shifts for major metropolitan areas. So things like San Francisco or London, because remember back that was also the onset of COVID. So you could kind of, if you could, by geolocating um, the IP addresses where the traffic was going, being requested from or going to, you could see that, some of that traffic shifted in the early part of 2020 from, say, effectively downtown San Francisco or San Francisco. You can see it now over the course of the year moving sort of more out to the suburbs, more
Mhm,
into the Bay Area, maybe more up north, things like that.
mhm, mhm.
And then over the years, after I joined, it's evolved, and we've added more and more metrics and more and more, tried to add more perspectives into your review.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a very interesting project, and I remember when I still when I remember, pardon me, when I found it, and it's like, hey, Cloudflare's got this sort of like, and I was comparing it to the HTTP archive
Right.
almanac, because I'm like, oh, Cloudflare's got their own almanac, and to me, it was so natural.
Conceptually similar.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And, you guys have, the big network, you have access to very similar data. Why not?
Right.
You know, it's like, multiple newspapers having, editions. It's like, hey, New York Times, LA Times, Chicago Times.
Right.
It's all good. So no, I always thought that was super duper interesting. So speaking of, folks, so one of the things that we talked about with regards to like this episode is like, how should we approach it? And I thought it'd be interesting for us to sort of like look at particular parts of the year in review and just kind of like discuss some of the data. What does it mean? The insights that David may have. Knowing about the data, because I believe as well, if I'm not mistaken, there was a sort of like a detailed blog post, right, that came with this, with the year in review as well.
Right. Yeah. Well, we publish the website version of it, and then we publish. Actually, usually we'll do two companion blog posts. One
Mm,
is a general post that looks at uh, your interesting findings or the highlights of most of the year in review, and then we have another companion blog post that drills down a little bit further into the top internet services section of the year. So there's one section of the year in review that gets its own blog post, basically.
And what I'll do right now then is I'll actually just share the doc, and we'll just start to like rifle through some of the information. And again, if there's anything in particular that you want to sort of jump on early, we can do that as well and just have that conversation. All right. So I remember looking at this chart right here, and with the internet traffic, the growth of 19%.
Right.
And in my head, I've always believed that the internet, it's like, hey, this is how we live on a daily basis. Like we have the means to sort of um, get on the internet for one, and for two, and you let me know what you think of this statement. And I remember Berners-Lee kind of talked about this, and a few others, but I kind of regard the internet as like this essential service where basically, people, the slightest inquiry they make, they usually jump online.
Right.
And can we attribute that kind of like surge in traffic more or less to sort of like that kind of situation?
I mean, it's hard to say. I think what drove the surge we see here. I mean, it's interesting because the graph shape is very similar to what we've seen in the past.
Mhm.
So there's sort of this nominal growth through the first few quarters of the year, and then it looks like it kind of picks up when people go back to school sort of after summer vacation.
Mhm, mhm,
So we've seen that in the past few years. I don't know if that's the actual driver for it to say that, hey, everybody going back to school, everybody kind of going back to work drives all this massive growth in the last quarter of the year. But it's but I think we still it's become absolutely essential. I think I agree with you there. The first instinct now for anything is just picking up your phone or grabbing your laptop and looking something up or adding it to your list or it's whatever it is. Is I think you become online is certainly being driven online these days, and then I think what we see here also potentially is more and more app usage, or I'd say background app usage even where it's not just that there's internet traffic happening when you're actively using the internet, but you've got apps running in the background in various ways, and those things are also driving internet traffic.
And absolutely, it's the idea that everything is like kind of like a default to the net now. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
let me find this, let me find that, and that's more or less kind of like what I was referring to mentally in
Yep.
terms of the idea that the internet being an absolute essential service. Uh, you know, it's interesting because there's this conversation around going back to dumb phones, and I'm thinking like, okay, so what about this? What about that?
Right, right. How do you do all these things?
Exactly. Like, oh, you mean you want to go into the bank now? And anyhow. I just thought that was interesting. But the fact that there is that surge in traffic, I think, is indicative of where we sort of have to think about, or what part of me we have to think about, especially as developers. Because if you're going to create anything now, best believe it's going to be used, and we want to make sure that it is a good experience when they do
Right.
sort of like build this app. And folks, we're gonna go through this document. We're not gonna go through everything, but there's certain points that I thought that we should definitely talk about. I stopped here during the when I was scanning this a couple weeks ago in terms of internet service and seeing Google being number one. Seeing Apple as number three was a little eye opening to me. Like, does everyone hit the Apple site and just drool?
So what we're this sorry, so this data is, or this section is derived from data we collect from our quad one, the 1.1.1.1 DNS resolver. So I'll say it's all anonymized, it's all aggregated. So if you're using it, we don't know where you're going, but we know, as a whole, people from your country, or users, from a given country, are requesting particular host names. Uh, but so specifically here, what we're doing is aggregating groups of host names into a given service. So like for Google, we're looking at not only, google.com, but also maps.google.com and mail.google.com. So, Google has a pretty good portfolio of services that is, of course, also widely used. So that's one of the things that helps drive them to number one. To your point about Apple, so it's unlikely that all that traffic is going to regular plain old apple.com. But I suspect there's a lot of telemetry and things like that are going on Apple devices. And if you're using our Quad One resolver, we're going to see those lookups for those particular host names. So I think aggregating all of that together helps drive Apple into the number three spot.
Got you. Something else that I thought was very interesting in this area when I went down to news, and again, looking at where people or where the traffic is moving to, you
Right.
know, global being number one was also eye opening because I think it's like a Portuguese news site or Portuguese language news
Mm.
site. What could be explained?
So I believe it's a Brazilian site, so probably in Portuguese, but I think one of the things you need to recognize for this aggregation as well is that there's going to be ostensibly some level of bias based on the user base and the concentration of the user base. So we had talked about this earlier, and I went and looked, and if you look at traffic to our quad resolver over a reasonably long period of time, you can see that Brazil accounts for I forget, a non-trivial percentage of it. So the U.S. is obviously number one, or usually number one. Brazil, I think, was like the second or third largest share of traffic. So I think the biases of like that basically are probably helped Globo achieve the top rank here.
Mhm, mhm. And again, just looking at that, news sites, I get it. ESPN being number 2, I had to sort of like do some thinking myself as well. Like, okay, it's a sports news site, but also I do know that ESPN is published in multiple languages, you know.
Right. Okay. So that helps drive that'll help drive traffic to people across the world.
Exactly, exactly, and that's, what, came to my mind eventually. But again, super interesting. The e-commerce one also was interesting, and I say that simply because, for the big, you know, the powerhouses in e-com that we know well, Amazon, Shopify, eBay, and then see, the rest of the top 10, outside of North America.
Well, and I think that it speaks to two. I think probably speaks to a couple of things. One is, the growing popularity of these types of sites within the rest of the world. Now that sites like Temu and Shein are popular, not just in Asia Pac, um,
Mm.
but growing popularity like in the U.S., for instance. But then it also speaks to, I think, that just the large user base, for those sites in the Asia Pacific region or elsewhere. You hang out on the maker forums, you hang out on the tech forums, and everybody talks about ordering, the pieces and the parts from Alibaba and AliExpress. Yeah, and then the fast fashion. So I think, these sites are all becoming a lot more popular just outside their own countries.
Yeah, yeah. No, and they are. Folks, I'm in Toronto, and I was sort of like walking through one of our major malls, and then I know Shein had a pop up, and my lineup was intense. But I'll get back to where I think it could apply to anyone who's in sort of like the performance space and whatnot. Like, we are seeing where the traffic is going, and I remember a long time ago. You may remember this name, Bruce Lawson.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so he used to work at Opera. He's currently at, I think he's at Vivaldi.
Vivaldi. Yep.
Yeah, but he talks about, not knowing where your customer is gonna come from. Your next customer could be coming from, any one of hundreds of locations. And, if you're a classic e-commerce developer, your customer might be on eBay 1 minute and Alibaba the next,
Right.
and, this.
That statement actually gives me an idea for something to add to this year's year in review, which is, looking at referral traffic. 'Cause
Mhm.
we do use referral traffic for other things we have on radar, but to look at it and say, okay, what sites, what platforms are driving the most traffic to, Cloudflare customers over the course of the year. And, it's probably going to be a lot of Google. But how much of it is now going to start coming from AI platforms? How much of it is coming from um, social media sites, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point I was going to make as well is just the fact that you might think like, oh, you know what, I have an American user base, and they're on eBay all the time, they're on Shopify all the time, but here, the evidence is that they will jump down to Alibaba, they will go to Timu. Is that how I pronounce Timu? I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah, but the point is that you have to be prepared because that Timo customer might be used to a very sort of like sparse site, because
Right.
Temu probably has a large user base in like APAC and things like that, and then out of nowhere they're going to hit your Shopify site, which is sort of like you think they're all iPhone users, and it's not the case. Anyway, we can yap about that in detail afterwards.
So one of the interesting things I'll point out about this graph is that what we see when so SpaceX will often announce, or they'll always announce, hey, service is now available in country X. And you can, if you select that country from from the selector up above, you'll see traffic basically shoot up within days of that announcement. So it's really interesting to see that there is this sort of pent up demand for Starlink services in so many places around the world.
Absolutely, and I'll speak from like a bit of experience. Super close friend of mine in the Caribbean uh, set up some Starlink services at his home there, and then they just recently made some kind of announcement. There's some kind of cap on
Oh yeah,
yeah, what they can offer, but he told me it's a very, very popular service,
yeah,
and people are able to sort of capture uh, a decent, sort of service in, these remote locations, in the Caribbean, and I'm sure other locations around the world,
yeah. It's been interesting to see just the coverage that they have. And I mean, my understanding basically is that they can, I think, can reach pretty much everywhere, and a lot of the velocity of the uptake, or the velocity of the footprint expansion is driven by working with the governments
Mhm.
and having all the proper permits and licensing and whatever they need to do business in those countries.
Yeah, yeah. No, that was a really interesting data point. Is the bot traffic, something worth sort of like discussing on
I think
your.
it highlights, in comparison to a lot of other bots, just how active Google is. It's one of the things I think we talk about a lot of Cloudflare, but is to see, looking at bot traffic towards our customers, seeing not only sort of Google's patterns, but just how much more they're crawling than any of the other bots that we look at.
Mhm, mhm. I did see that, and I was like, "Wow, this is a a very busy graphic.
Yeah.
And in fact, I know there's a particular chapter with a lot of bot discussion, and then
Mhm.
in my head I was like, oh man, maybe I should spend a bit more time looking at this, but I was sort of like stuck on some of the other juicy data. Um, Anything we want to talk about in terms of search engines?
I mean, that maps to the graph above where, because Google is the dominant search engine, search engine crawling is obviously the highest traffic category. And then you can see that, you have AI crawlers and others that are lower, that are aggregate of, a number of other bots.
Now, for all the Android and iOS users, we're not picking fights here. Please keep it real, civil, and we're not picking sides on top of that. But this is something that many of us have talked about in the past, which is the fact that there is an outsized number of Android versus Apple for the most part.
Mhm.
This is what sort of data is showing us now. Is it this one that oh, no, it's the other one. But, I looked at some of the, data here in terms of, like, this was super interesting again, and you know what? The frame, just because I zoomed in, some of this is sort of off.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit like this.
Yeah, which is
Makes
totally
it
fine.
aware.
Yeah, which is now I remember why I didn't wanna zoom in too much, but it was totally fine. Here's a good question. What is Jersey? Because I
It's a
see no.
small island territory. I forget exactly where it's located, but it's a smaller island territory. So this is one of those, like, Jersey is probably, in the Faroe Islands, I think, are locations that sort of I don't want to say they snuck onto the list. So we do some data cleaning, in terms of this. So we're not going to show, Antarctica as number one, because there's the one penguin there. He uses, an Apple device, and so they've got 100% iOS. So there's definitely a lower bound of, like, okay, here's how many requests we need to see from a given country in order to be included. I think countries like Monaco, Jersey, the Faroe Islands are sort of probably just over that line.
Mhm.
So that, they qualify, but comparing them to the US is still a little bit,
Yeah.
you know,
It's yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and I was actually gonna bring that up saying, like, "Hey, are you guys cleaning it? Is there some kind of threshold that you have in terms of" but folks, this is again an idea of just, how particular geos are split. Now, we may not need to look at, Jersey, Monaco, and some of these islands, but, let's look at, I don't know, I tend to talk about the G7s, but, let's look at something like, I don't know, Sweden, 60-40 in favor of iOS. But that's still something, good to know. I remember I was looking at some of the 50-50 uh, geos, Greenland, 50-50, even though, what is it, 55,000 people live there, something along those lines. But it's still significant enough for you to sort of like
right.
keep these data points in mind. So, Monaco, in terms of, even this one right here, Papua New Guinea, 97%, Android,
Yeah.
so
Again, probably not seeing a ton of request traffic, but enough to make the list.
yes, exactly. And so, folks, these are data points that you want to keep in mind. We've talked about this in the past, Android devices versus uh, iOS devices. It's not the same. You could go read some of Alex Russell's work, so he'll tell you all about that in terms of, like, what is his last blog post was the I in iPhone is for inequality. you know? I'll send it to you. It's really long, but he talks about just how the iPhone is such a powerful device that you cannot base any of your performance testing on an iPhone, right?
Yeah, and you look at, the Android list here sorted this way, and you can see even that a lot of the top countries here are, countries in conflict, quite frankly. Sudan, Ethiopia, Yemen, Somalia, Chad. Those are countries that, are constantly, there's constantly military conflict going on. So, if you're developing applications or tools for, users to communicate, let's say, or in those countries, that's you're going to want to develop, focus on Android.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is the kind of useful data that I think is so important to have, because as you're developing and you can start to see some trends, maybe in some of your traffic, you can keep this kind of data in mind. So, which is what I loved about it. Um, This was also interesting. I posted about this, I think this morning, but let's talk about this very quickly. Now, this, folks, if you, for those who can see this, hopefully, yeah. We are looking at HTTP versions across geos, anywhere from 1, 2, and 3. So, let's talk about this because I know at one point, I remember, mentioning that. Let me go back and find that one data point that I brought up. The Netherlands, in a 50% HTTP.1x. I thought that was high. Someone else did as well.
Right.
You had sort of like an explanation for that.
Yeah. So for the data behind this, we're looking at basically all traffic that we see. So when a request comes into Cloudflare, one of the things we do is assign it a bot score. So basically, how likely is this request to be coming from a human, or how likely is this request to be coming from an automated some automated tool? It could be a bad bot, could be a good bot, doesn't matter at that point. But it's sort of like it scores bot or it scores human. So in this particular case, what we're doing is looking at all traffic, so both bot traffic and human traffic. So I think one of the things that you'll see here, like the Netherlands or Hong Kong or Singapore or Ireland, especially Ireland, is that they all have a good concentration of cloud regions. So the major hyperscalers generally have regions that are located in those countries, and I think that is probably a lot of what's driving the HTTP1 traffic. So we're seeing a lot of bot traffic emanating from those hyperscalers in those countries, and it's just using HTTP1, whatever. The bot authors have not bothered to try to figure out how to build their bots to use, H3. And frankly, maybe there's really no reason for it because I think some of the benefits that everybody who worked on H3 tried to deliver with it are more, obviously more for the human users, more for you shopping on somewhat, you doing your shopping or you doing social media or whatever, not so much a bot that's trying to scrape, something or check, is this site available? Is it, how is it performing? Is it whatever?
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Um, and good to know, but I love the idea of having this split up, between
Yep.
1 and 3, and you have, again, kind of a concept of what people or what kind of experiences people are having,
Right,
you know?
right. And if you look at Radar, so this data is also available on the adoption and usage pages on Radar. And if you look for, say, the Netherlands, there,
Mhm.
you can toggle between looking at, with bot traffic, without bot traffic.
Good to know. And I think I've put this link in the chat, folks, which is I think it was this one right
Yep,
here.
radar.cloudflare.com.
Yeah, this one right here. So if you want to get an idea and sort of like drill down, you can go to this page and sort of like look at some of the data there as well. Uh, Let me go back to our favorite page. Let's start to go through here. Website technologies. This is something that has been sort of looked at time and time again. Between this and the HP archive, I definitely don't want to spend too much time here. I did see something that caught me not off guard, but that made me smile. Where is it? Yes, seeing AMP at the bottom here, which is, shout out to Malty. You always keep coming up somehow.
Hanging on.
Yeah, exactly. He's around, still making it to the top 10. It's a testament to your work, Malty. But anyhow, let's keep going. There are a couple of other areas that I thought we should, browser market share. Something that is always very important. For developers out there who, from time to time, you know, malign particular browsers about features that they feel are missing, or that have not been sort of like implemented yet, that are still in Canary, whatever it might be. But this has been also very interesting to look at. And again, there's no huge secret here. We know that, Chrome for the most part has been the dominant browser, but
Right.
there's some other details here. Anything in particular from this chapter that you remember was
I
interesting?
think that some of the interesting stuff here is when you start digging in at a country level and then at the country sort of platform level. And I don't recall any specific, highlights. I think if you look at maybe like obviously China or like South Korea, I think you'll see. I think South Korea probably shows there are a couple of homegrown, vendors there. But I think that's the interesting part is when you start drilling down a little bit more into the platforms, into the countries. Um, as a developer, you can get that sense of, okay, I'm developing for Windows users in South Korea. I need to make sure my stuff works on Edge or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, yeah. And, we talked about drilling down, folks. If you go to the top right corner, well, top right, at the top, anyhow, you'll see worldwide, but you can start to, pick some of the geos that you want, some of the countries. Let's take a quick look at China. Let me see, where are you here? China.
So you can see there, like, Chrome, globally, Chrome is like 80%, 80 something percent. In China, it's like 20, what does that say? 28%. Safari is 22%, and you got QQ, which edges out Edge, and then you've got the Huawei browser at like 10%. So you can see the shifts over the course of the year.
Mhm.
You can also see the mix is very different than it is globally.
Absolutely. And that's, you know, I hadn't gone down and drilled down per particular countries. I'd look at a couple G7s to see what it was like, but having gone to China here, very, very eye opening. When it gets back to, have you ever been to Perf now? Have you been?
No, Tim's conference, I have not.
Yeah, very interesting. One of the best presentations I watched there was from a young lady who has this little startup, I guess, but she basically helps you do business in China, and she talked about, all things China in terms of just like, you
Well,
know,
luck with that. Yeah.
well, yeah, but she was like, "There's a process,"
Oh yeah.
and and then just to look at, the networks and, understanding how that market works
Right.
as well, and again, this is gives you sort of like this idea that things are just different.
Absolutely, yep.
Mhm.
And we also so this data also gets published on a quarterly basis on Radar. So we do a browser market share report and a search engine market share report where you can drill down into the various countries and the various platforms. And so for your review, we're sort of aggregating it into that long-term perspective, but we do publish the underlying data on a quarterly basis.
Nice. And it's not published like it is for this document. It's not like a quarterly review, and you think,
No, no, that one's more of a, I'll say it's a less attractive report, more data centric, and I believe if I remember correctly, we also make the underlying data available for download. So for somebody that wants to just grab it and do their own sort of local analysis on it, it's there as well. And there we also look at I think a longer tail of browsers, a longer tail of search engines.
no, awesome, good to know. I'll definitely ping you when, or you let me know when it's sort of like about to be published, and then
Yep. I think
you know.
The Q4 report, I believe, was just published. I think the Q4 2025 report. I think.
All right, I'll go looking for it. That was browser market share. Is there something here I want to look at? I don't think so. But folks, you can explore, each chapter, and again, Mac OS, Android, iOS, Windows, mobile. These are things that you can look at, and again, collect some of this information, and it may help you for your little situation, whether it be at work or independently. You want to launch an app, who knows? But this is all information that's great to have along with you. One of the last few that I wanted to talk about was this one right here. I thought this internet outage section was absolutely fascinating.
This is one of my areas of focus, so I could talk about this for an hour.
Oh, well, I mean, let's close it out here then, because we only have really like just about 4 or 5 minutes left. But I really want to talk about this because there's so many things that I've known about outages, and we have some reasons down here. But I'll let you start. You said that you smiled the minute I brought this up.
Yeah, this is a topic that I've been covering. So this goes back, even to when I was doing a State of the Internet report, and eventually realized at some point, like, hey, these things that are happening out on the internet are visible in traffic data, and so covered that to some extent with the State of the Internet report. I have continued to follow that and be involved in that uh, in this sort of collaborating with civil society in terms of tracking what's going on, understanding why it's happening, things like that. So for a while, I had my own blog that was covering internet disruptions. Um, and then got another job. So I sort of refocused my energy on my employment. But one of the things we've been doing with Radar and your review is highlighting the the volume of outages that we see across the year, as well as where they're happening. So one of the things that you had highlighted before this call was the clusters that are visible there in sort of mid to late summertime. So the June July period, and then like August September. Um, and those are generally, most of that is government directed shutdowns. So where the government says to the network providers, basically, you are shutting off the internet between time A and time B, and because of these reasons, and the reasons in many of those cases are to prevent cheating on exams.
Mhm.
And this is one of those things that's been going on in places like Syria and Iraq, and a few other countries. For probably 10 years now, at least. And it blows people's minds though that's a thing. Because I think, to think about it in the US, if they were to say like, okay, every time the SATs were happening, we're going to shut down the internet in the US. It's like, that is just not a thing. Uh,
Yeah.
but in these countries where there is a more centralized control, or there is a more authoritarian government, um, those shutdowns are unfortunately a little bit easier to affect.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we've been seeing now, for instance, over the last 4 weeks today, is the shutdown in Iran, where
Mm.
they've had all the protests in Iran that happened, running into the new year, and then after the new year. And then on January 8th, we saw traffic just absolutely crater. And, it's over the last week or so, traffic has been slowly coming back, but it's been very filtered, very restricted. So it's, some of these are very clear and known, on off, like Syria Telecom or Syria Department of Education publishes a schedule and basically says, here's the dates and times for these sets of exams. And we've told the telecommunications ministry, you will shut down the internet. So
Wow.
like somebody like me, I look at it and go, great. I put it in my calendar. I'm like, okay, we get the alert that says there's a traffic anomaly in Syria or Iraq. Okay, we know what's going on. But then there are other times when we see traffic anomalies and outages in other countries or on other networks. And then it's this game of sleuth where it's like, okay, geez, traffic in Canada dropped, a whole bunch. What happened? And then it's trying to understand, are people online complaining about it? Is what provider did traffic, where did that traffic shift happen? What provider? Did they publish anything on social media that says, hey, we had a cable cut, or hey, there was a fire in our data center, or we it was DNS, as it always is. So there's always these, there's a variety of different reasons these outages happen.
Yeah, yeah, and I remember, years ago discovering the idea of exams being the source of, these internet, outages. I was like,
Yeah,
"What is going on?" Like, this is
you
the
have a social problem that you're trying to solve technically, so that is just a bad idea.
uh, tell me about it. And, getting back to what you mentioned, because again, folks, if you look at this part of the doc and the map, and they sort of highlight the amount of outages in the past year, in particular countries, and, we just talked about Syria, and potentially Iran. If you hover over this one area where it says
Mhm.
55 outages, 51 Iraq, 15 outages in Syria. And I'm sure some of it might just be beyond, this education bit that, we sort of covered.
That was a lot. I think like Syria probably does their exams for like a 2 week period, give or take.
Mhm.
So 15 days, 2 weeks, whatever. Iraq is a little bit interesting because you have, I don't even know how to describe it. You have the Kurdish section of Iraq, right up north, and then you have the rest of Iraq. So the problem is that they're both doing multiple sets of exams over the course of the year, separately. So
Mhm.
there were some days where we'll see, two Iraq-based outages because the Kurds have, their exam period from, they shut down the internet up there from, 6 to 8 a.m. And then the rest of Iraq shuts their internet down between, 7 and 10 a.m. or whatever.
Right, right. And again, the fact that this is sort of like the government indicating that, hey, exams are taking place. Here are the dates that we are targeting. This sort of like, or not targeting. We are sort of like initiating this shutdown of internet,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you could tell here from again your data collected that of all the outages, 83 out of like I don't know how many were government directed.
Yep, 174. Yep. So it's almost
Wow.
almost half. Uh,
Incredible, incredible. And I'm gonna get back to it again. I always want to kind of frame this under this sort of, idea of web performance. And two things I remember. I remember discovering, oh my God, what is it called now? It is called the Waffle House Index.
yes.
And for those who don't know, a very interesting data point, exclusive to America and exclusive to, I guess,
Mostly the southern part of America.
the southern part of America, where they base a storm's intensity on the amount of Waffle House restaurants that are still open,
Right,
you know?
right. If Waffle
So
House closed, it was a bad storm.
exactly, exactly. I remember finding out, just laughing my head off, but I thought it was just so almost heartwarming that they're
Yeah.
like, "Hey, if this shop is closed, it's a horrible storm," you know? They also talked about the idea of, the networks being bad, but still relatively usable.
Mhm.
But it also meant that is your site, is your service usable under these constraints?
Right.
And
And that's we don't have that level of detail here, but that is definitely a conversation around, was it a shutdown? In many cases, the government or the network providers will basically pull their routes. So they basically, they'll make some BGP changes that make their networks invisible to the rest of the internet. And that's a complete outage. And that's just bad. You're completely offline. Other countries will do a little bit more, as you were saying, they'll do more filtering, they'll do more things like that, and make it so that connectivity remains available, but it's lower bandwidth. It's certain things are blocked. Those are the things that are a little bit harder to measure. Although there are organizations that have mechanisms for measuring things like that, like UNI.
yeah, and um, and it gets back to I was having a bunch of sort of like recollections. I remember there was a moment where there was a lot of conversation around orgs that provided a very slimmed down version of their sites.
Right.
Like CNN.com to this day is available on a very, very light sort of like text based sort of like render. In fact, I'll probably find it. There it is.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah. So it's just all text.
Yeah, all text. Folks, this is current news. Light.cnn.com. And they made this specifically for these kind of situations where, you know what, you don't want the video, you don't want images, you don't want ads. We will still deliver the news, but latest stories.
I'm trying to figure out why I zeroed in on Pizza Hut is closing hundreds of locations.
I don't even see that.
It's like in the middle of the page there. That makes like 12-year-old me very sad.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I see right now. That's so funny. But, getting back to that topic, I want to shout out someone, Caleb. He had been working on this idea of, I don't know if it's with the W3C, but, some kind of proposal around like, I pulled it up actually. What am I talking about? He called it structured low bandwidth information markup. And I think he wants to base it around the need for a particular style of, well, we could sort of like read it here. Slim is a minimal text first authoring profile that provides resilience and usability in low bandwidth network conditions. Now, again, folks, this may sound funny, but sometimes there are brownouts. You have a little bit going on. It's not completely shut down, but just a little bit to get you by. And, can you operate under these conditions? And he brought this up simply because, we talked about the government shutdowns here, but bad actors, you know.
Right. One of the other things that just made me think about that is that, that proposal, um, may be very similar to or complementary to the movement that's going on now around making web content available more readily for AI crawlers. So, basically translating content into Markdown.
Yes.
And Markdown is just raw text, and it compresses really well, so you don't have all the CSS, all the JavaScript, all the images. So that may be a mechanism also if you're trying to save bandwidth or make your site available. Somehow leverage the Markdown markup or
Yeah.
markup whatever, uh, to make it available in that fashion.
No, absolutely. And this is and again, when he and I had that conversation, he was saying it's like this is the next attack where you will have an adversary. It's not going to be, missiles, it's not going to be, big bombs or whatever. He feels like with the internet being that essential service, you start to cut these things off,
Right,
and people are basically in the dark, literally.
right,
You
right,
know, and so the idea of being ready and creating these sort of situations where your site is still accessible under these very constrained networks, extremely important discussion. And that's why we get back to the idea that web performance is just really like, can you serve up the information that people need on the spot as fast as possible?
right.
Not to get macabre, but one of the most interesting talks I've ever listened to, because I don't think there was a video at the time, or maybe there was, but I always remember listening to this presentation. It was shortly after 9/11, and one of the leads at CNN gave a talk at some conference and talked about everything that happened after
Yep.
9/11.
Yeah, I was at Akamai at the time, and I remember, working. I not me, but working. Our teams were working very closely with CNN to figure out basically how do we keep that site up, and they were, I think, trying to figure out how do we strip it down.
Mhm.
So I remember hearing a story, and I don't know if it's true or not, but or if it even makes technical sense, but that they were trying to figure out, you know, how they could strip whatever they needed to down to like basically fit in like a single return packet. So
Mhm.
they weren't loading that response with tons of, CSS and JavaScript and whatever, but it was like, no, here's like the barest information that you need to know and shooting it back. So maybe it was a couple of packets or whatever. But yeah, it's I definitely remember those. I definitely remember that happening at the time.
Yeah, yeah. I actually have somewhere, maybe on a backup, but I have the audio of that presentation, because I was like, I need to keep this, and I wanted to go back and listen to it. And I actually went back, digging around, looking for the engineer. And he was working somewhere at the time. And I was like, should I message him? Because I'd love to hear about this, because I think this was like 20 years later at the time. Anyhow, I don't spend too much time here, but I feel like, this could be like a separate conversation one day because I'd love to hear more about, the sort of details around outages. Because again, a company like Cloudflare is first to find out outside of like the actual users.
Right.
So you guys are basically second in line. I mean, I'm just going to race through some of the areas here because I think we should definitely be wrapping up. The internet quality part I thought was kind of interesting. Now, what is quickly going on here? It says download speeds, upload speeds. Is it
Right.
really Spain that's up top?
So, based on the tests that are taken against the Cloudflare speed test, we have a speed test at speed.cloudflare.com. We aggregate all those results together. Spain comes out on top. That is a little surprising, especially for me, spending 10 years doing the state of the internet. It was always Japan and South Korea and countries, the Northern European countries that were on top. But in digging in a little bit, trying to understand what's happening, Spain has a government mandate, I believe, it was some sort of mandate that said, you know, that the providers needed to make gigabit connectivity available to, I believe it was to basically to all subscribers, households, whatever, by the end of 2025.
Wow.
So maybe I've gotten something there wrong, but basically they said, here's our broadband plan, here's our timeline, and looking at this, it seems to be pretty clear that it was effective.
That's amazing.
It may be the case that people are not all subscribing to gigabit connectivity,
Mhm.
but at least it is available to them, or, everywhere.
Yeah. And again, I'd always heard South Korea, South Korea. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, go South
But a very similar situation there where the government said years ago, this is probably 20 years ago, I think as a condition of spinning off KT out of the government, They said, I think we'll fund you to some extent, but under this condition that you bring high speed internet connectivity to, you know, some percentage of homes or businesses passed by, some date.
Mhm.
And the late, the teams, when I was working on the report, the broadband plans, national broadband plans were a big thing. And, the US had one at one point. I think it's kind of been abandoned, but, a lot of these, I was reading them, and these countries were saying, here's how we're defining things, and here's our targets, and here's our timelines. And, then at least at the time, the State of the Internet report could look at it and say, well, they're actually making progress towards it, or, they're not, depending on what our measurements were.
No, fascinating. Seeing Brazil in the top 10 also eye-opening because just generally, we think of Brazil, brick, emerging market,
Yep.
not always the best. Maybe broadband's working out, but maybe, cell connectivity is not, you know.
One of the things I will highlight, and for the people that are in the the speed test space, is that I think a lot of them spent a long time convincing the populace that internet quality is based on download speed. If you have a high download speed, you have great internet quality. And I think more recently, over the last several years, we've come around to really also refocusing on latency, on the
Yes.
importance of latency there, where you could be on a gigabit connection, but if you have high latency, you're going to have a worse user experience than if you had a 50 megabit connection with super low latency.
Yeah.
And so I think as you're a designer, as you're a performance engineer, measuring latency is critically important because that's going to be a big driver of how the user experiences your site or your application.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the latency stupid, you know.
Right.
It's very classically. I remember, I don't know if you started, well, I'll say this much. I do remember Mike Belshi had published this piece specifically about that,
Yes, I now that you mentioned, I do remember that, and that was it was a piece about how download speeds sort of topped out. It was like over 100 megabits or something like that. I forgot
Yeah.
exactly what the number was, but there, you definitely hit a plateau over a certain point. So, looking at that and saying, "Oh, I've got gigabit connectivity, that's great," but you're not going to like the sites are not going to deliver content any faster than like 100 megabits. So, yay. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I always remember that piece because I remember he wrote it. Then Ilya Grigoric, when he did his
yes.
CP book, he mentioned the Bell Sheet post and had a similar post, but sort of like expanding on the idea.
Yeah.
Yada yada. Yada. Anyhow,
I totally forgot about that.
yeah, yeah. It's like everything comes back. You're like, wait, I think I read this.
Yes.
Um, but again, along what we just talked about right here, people, testing their speeds. Apparently in London, they're testing the most. Mobile versus desktop, this could have been another conversation entirely around the connectivity. But you know what? I'll probably just wrap it up here. I had a sense that we could probably spend so much more time talking, because this is exactly, folks, what I envisioned when having this sort of, first of all, David as guest and this kind of content being discussed because there's always sort of like a backstory, and it's important to know it, and especially as people in the performance space, you know, you want to remember it's like, oh wait, you know, they have a high this geo has sort of like a high, traffic in H1. Okay, good to know. But is it bot or is it like human traffic? Oh, okay, it's mostly bot. All right. I know what to do with that information now,
Right.
and everything else. So, super, super fascinating sort of document. And again, I'll bring up the fact that you can go to, where is it? Oh, there it is. If you go to this address right here, folks, you'll be able to read this entire doc in your own time and space because there's a lot to go through. And, I encourage you to go through all the geos as well to kind of see what it's like in other areas of the world. Um, what else is coming out of radar, sir?
Oh boy. We are working on um, adding some additional AI related insights, some additional security related insights. I know those are coming in the next several weeks. I've got a roadmap. We want to try to add browser version data. So that is, it's one of those things where I think people look at it and say, it's surprising you don't have that. But as you likely know, when you start dealing with things like user agent strings and browser versions, it is calling it a dumpster fire is being charitable. So trying to figure out, if there's anywhere that you need data cleaning, it's browser versions.
Mhm.
So working, hopefully we'll be able to launch something like that in the future. Really just trying to think about, what other, not only what other data do we have at Cloudflare that we can expose via radar, but what other data is of interest to everybody,
Mhm.
and how can we, how can we address those requests and requirements. And of course, it's never too early to start thinking about year review.
Yeah.
So I'll start planning for the 2026 year review, in the next few months as well.
Here's kind of an aside. How many editors and writers do you have for this whole piece?
So the radar blog post, the blog posts are generally me, and then I have a colleague Joao, who's Lisbon based, and he writes the top internet services post. And then behind the scenes, though, we have, I really should know the number, but we have a decent sized team of engineers. Um, 6 or 7 or 8 engineers, who are doing everything from, initial data analysis to, developing ETLs and pipelines and building the APIs on top of those, to doing the front end design work. So that's been one of the greatest things about Radar is having a team to rely on and to work with. So that, when somebody has that idea, we can bring it from, okay, let's do, data analysis across a week or a month or whatever. Those graphs look like, you know, they pass the gut test or they pass the, whatever. And then, okay, now let's build the ETLs and the pipelines and then, build the API on top of that to get it into Radar.
Now, someone who's been people who've been watching this have been fascinated. They'd like to talk to you about other details. How do they get in touch with you, David?
So they can email us at radar@cloudflare.com.
Mhm.
Via email. We're also on the socials, on X, on Mastodon, on Blue Sky. So some version of Cloudflare Radar or radar.cloudflare.com on those platforms. You can find me on X and Mastodon and Blue Sky and LinkedIn, D Belson or David Belson. If you search for those, I should come up. But yeah, definitely want to hear from folks. If you've got ideas, if you've got questions, yeah, absolutely. Please reach out.
Perfect, and they definitely will. Any closing words from you?
No, I think this was great. I really had a great time talking, and hopefully I didn't monopolize. But no, thank you for the opportunity.
When you're sharing nuggets, when you're sharing data, when you're sharing, information, it's never monopolized. That's the
Definitely
way I
stuff
see
where
it.
it's like you wind me up and let me go, and just sort of check back in if I'm still talking every so often.
Totally. Usually at the start of the stream, I'm like, I'm handing over the keys, you're driving, so it's really about that. You know, I know the F1 cars are a little tight, but I'll squeeze in the back somewhere. I'll just hang on.
Here we go.
Folks, I want to thank you very much for attending today, for sticking around. This is actually one of the longer ones I've had, but there's so much good information to talk about, and there's so much more we could have done as well. But this episode will be edited, probably ready next week. Shouldn't have any problems to do that. And
Okay.
folks, we'll talk to you very soon. Thank you.